Welcome back to The Explainer. So, when we think of ancient religious texts, we usually just picture, dusty relics or really rigid rules that honestly don't have much to do with our fast-paced, high-stress modern lives, right? But today, we are flipping that assumption entirely on its head. We're going to dive into a 2,500-year-old Buddhist text, and we're not looking at it as a piece of ancient history. Instead, we're looking at it as an incredibly sophisticated blueprint for modern psychology. It is quite literally an ancient system for hacking the human mind to achieve lasting peace and mental clarity. Here's the roadmap for our journey today. We'll start with ancient text, modern psychology, then look at the architecture of wisdom, move into healing the modern mind, touch on resolving social conflict, and finally wrap up with a manual for humanity. All right, let's jump right into section 1. Ancient text, modern psychology, rethinking the scripture. So there's this really common myth that a text like the Theravada Buddhist scripture is basically just a dry list of rigid rules and dogmas. But the reality? The reality is actually quite different. Scholars and modern researchers are increasingly viewing this specific collection, which is known as the Aṅguttara Nikāya, as a highly sophisticated, super practical manual for human development. We're talking about a deeply integrated mental framework here. It actually bridges the gap between basic ethics and advanced psychological healing. So it's really not about blind faith at all. It's practically applied behavioral science. Moving on to section 2, the architecture of wisdom, a numerical ladder. Okay, the truly brilliant design of the Aṅguttara Nikāya is that it is organized entirely by numbers. It deliberately starts at 1 and literally climbs all the way up to 11. And you might be wondering why. Well, in an oral tradition, numbers create an easily memorizable system. But it's not just a memory trick. It actually acts as an escalating ladder of cognitive development. You start with these foundational, single concepts and progressively stack them to build a highly complex psychological framework. It is literally step-by-step cognitive training. Now, today we're focusing on the very top of that ladder, the books of the 10s and the 11s. And these groupings are incredibly special because they represent the absolute pinnacle of human spiritual and cognitive evolution. By the time you actually reach the 10s and 11s, you aren't just memorizing rules anymore. The text is dealing with the most advanced, interconnected aspects of the entire human experience. Think of it as the masterclass level of the framework. Which brings us to section 3, healing the modern mind, ancient cognitive therapy. Let's look at how this builds. This sequence from the Kimathia Sutta illustrates a really brilliant psychological domino effect. Step 1 is morality, or sila. Basically, by living ethically, you naturally remove regret and anxiety. And then that lack of distress naturally leads right into step 2, joy and peace. When your mind is actually joyful, you can easily achieve step 3, which is deep concentration. And that rock-solid focus ultimately opens the door to step 4, wisdom and liberation. It's a completely systemic progression. Simple moral behavior isn't just about, being good. It is the absolute non-negotiable foundation for rock-solid mental health. Now, to treat acute mental and physical distress, the Girimana Dasita offers what is known as Dhamma medicine. This involves using 10 specific mental perceptions, things like deeply considering impermanence, reflecting on the concept of non-self, and practicing mindfulness of breathing. And the thing is, these aren't just abstract philosophical ideas. They are active mental exercises. They're specifically designed to short-circuit panic, physical pain, and anxiety. And here is the absolutely crucial point. Modern researchers are recognizing that these ancient perceptions are strikingly similar to modern mindfulness and cognitive behavioral therapy. Modern medicine is literally using these exact ancient techniques today. They're being actively applied in long-term patient care, palliative care, and crisis management. It's wild to think about, but the Dhamma medicine prescribed 2,500 years ago is completely validating the absolute cutting edge of today's clinical psychology. That takes us to section 4, resolving social conflict, the Buddhist peace model. Shifting gears a bit from internal healing, the Agarapapati Naya Sutta offers a brilliant outward peace model. Usually when a trigger occurs, our standard reactive approach just defaults to anger and resentment, which, let's be honest, inevitably leads to escalation. But the model established in this text uses reason and emotional awareness at the exact moment of the trigger. This interrupts the cycle and leads directly to resolution. Peace scholars actually confirm that this highly practical model for managing anger applies perfectly to modern families, corporate organizations, and even large-scale social systems. It is conflict resolution at its absolute finest. And finally, Section 5,
A Manual for Humanity, Boundless Metta.
So we're back to the number 11. Specifically, we're looking at the Metta Sutta, which is found in the Book of the Elevens. This text explicitly lists exactly 11 distinct benefits of cultivating loving kindness or metta, and these benefits, they are remarkably practical. They range from sleeping deeply and waking comfortably, which is honestly something we could all use less doom scrolling to achieve, to having a mind that easily concentrates, all the way to dying with a clear, unconfused state of mind. It really shows that radiating goodwill isn't just a nice thing to do for others. It fundamentally rewires your own physiological and psychological well-being. So, when we pull back from all of these specific lists and look at the framework as a whole, the core takeaway becomes incredibly clear. The Aṅguttara Nikāya is definitely not just ancient literature. It's a deeply integrated, highly functional behavioral manual for humanity. It perfectly weaves together psychology, behavioral science, sociology, and ethics to map out a clear path for sustainable human happiness. It's basically a testament to the fact that the human mind hasn't really changed, and the instructions for how to operate it have kind of just been hiding in plain sight for millennia. Which brings us to our final thought. If a 2,500-year-old numerical framework holds the absolute blueprint for modern cognitive therapy and conflict resolution, well, how could its progressive ladder solve your modern anxieties today? The architecture of wisdom is already built. You just have to decide to take that first step. Thank you so much for joining me on The Explainer today, and keep learning.